Hi, welcome back to Chess for Sleep. In our last video, we took a look at quarterfinals of the Freestyle Goat Challenge. I just wanted to say that name one more time. The Freestyle Goat Challenge, Magnus having a nice win against Alireza in the quarterfinal, which he needed to stay alive. Today we're moving on to some standard chess, and we are starting our series, our preview series for the Candidates tournament that's coming up here in early April. So today we're going to be starting by taking a look at one of Fabiano Caruana's greatest games. I am a massive Fabiano Caruana fan, although I'm also a very big Magnus fan. Magnus is my favorite player, but Fabiano's a close second, and I will definitely be pulling for Fabiano in the Candidates coming up. So today we are looking at a game from Fabiano against Anish. This game took place in Vikensee back in 2012, so we're going back a bit. And, Fabiano usually plays e4. He's going to play d4, and I'm a d4 player, so I had extra interest in this game. This game is going to continue on for quite some time, looking quite equal, a lot like nothing's going on, and then we are going to see a tactic out of the blue that is a really memorable tactic and leads to a very strong initiative for Fabiano that Anish is just completely unable to withstand. It's a very cool game, and if you've never seen it, I think you're going to really enjoy it. So yeah, settle in, sit back, and let's get into it. So again, like I said, Fabiano usually starts e4, but in this game he started d4, and we get d5 from Anish, c4 from Fabi, and now we get the Slav from Anish. And these two players, certainly at this point and already in their young careers, they're known for being having excellent opening preparation, both of these players. So when you get, a big matchup between these two, you might be expecting, a big theoretical discussion. We're going to get into a super theoretical line, but that's actually not what we end up getting. First of all, again, we're getting the Slav defense, which, not as theoretical as some other opening, we're not getting a Grunfeld here, for instance. So, standard stuff, knight f3 from Fabi, knight f6 from Anish, e3 from Fabi, standard stuff, maybe not the most aggressive way to approach the Slav, but, certainly nothing wrong with it. And so now Black has a decision on how to proceed. Black could go right in for, get the triangle going right for a semi-Slav. We could see this bishop coming out to f5, which would lead to different positions. Anish goes with a6, and Lichess calls it the quiet variation. I'm not sure if it's a Chameleon / a Chameleon Slav yet, or if you have to get knight c3 for it to become that, but bottom line, the Chameleon Slav, also known as the Chameleon Slav, is characterized by this a6 move. So what is a6 all about? Well, a6 is a flexible move, and if you wonder, what's the point of this move? Well, what's the point of what's the point of h6 or a6 at any time? Well, here we're not controlling b5. We're already controlling b5, but a6, it would support a future b5, so we have that. And of course, you have to ask if that's something you want to play. Here, in this variation of the Slav, it's also serving as a waiting move. And, you might hear, well, a waiting move in the opening. We often think about waiting moves like in the middle game, make your opponent have to make a decision. Well, do we want to be waiting in the opening as black? And here, actually, waiting can make sense because black might not be sure, does black want to go ahead and get this bishop out? Well, depending on, white can play against this bishop moving. If the bishop, in that other variation we saw, if the bishop comes out, white can go for this kind of line. Queen b3. And this isn't, if black plays this correctly, this isn't necessarily bad for black, but it's a different kind of position altogether. And so, maybe black doesn't want to allow white to have the choice to go for a variation like that. So maybe we don't want to move this bishop out where, again, this kind of variation becomes basically forced white, bringing the queen to b3, if white wants to. Also, what else, what other pawn move are we going to make? Well, we could go for e6. Now we're committing to blocking in this bishop, though. And again, this is a perfectly good line for black, but again, it's just not as flexible once we've, this bishop is now blocked in. So a6 doesn't block in this bishop, doesn't commit this pawn, but also, and we're also not moving the bishop, weakening b7. And again, it is supporting b5, and that's actually what Anish is going to go for, as we'll see. So we get knight c3 from Fabi, and at this point we're squarely in, this Chepanenko, Chameleon Slav. This is the most common way, when you have a6 on the board, knight c3. This is what we see most often. And the most common way for black to play here, there's a couple options for black. Anish plays the most common move, which is b5. So you can also now go ahead and get the bishop out. With that, though, we still kind of go ahead and you have to deal with this. Black can actually play rook a7, which looks very strange, but there's no immediate way for white to exploit that. But again, why play a6? To avoid committing this bishop, only, now we're still going in for this kind of variation. But it's a move, just not as common. You could also, again, now play e6 and revert back to a semi-Slav. And you have a6 thrown in, but, that move is often part of a semi-Slav anyway. Sometimes you get a6, b5, bishop b7, eventually c5, that kind of thing. So you can also get bishop g4 here, h3, bishop h5. You can actually go ahead and play j4 if you want, come all the way out. And now this knight hitting the bishop. But, so different ways to approach that particular position. Sorry, coming back here. Anyway, what Anish plays is b5. And the idea with b5, we're opening up the square actually for this bishop. This bishop could potentially come out on this diagonal, but often in this position, what you'll see this bishop coming to b7, where admittedly it doesn't look like it's doing much, but white takes here, black recaptures with the c pawn. Now this bishop is yes, it's still biting at d5, but often what black wants to do is put a knight here, and now this knight is reinforced by the pawn and then the bishop behind it. So that's, those are some ideas behind b5. Also, of course, black is just threatening to move these pawns. Well, black's immediately threatening to win the pawn, but also, if white doesn't, react to this at all, black is potentially, coming down the board with these pawns. So there's two ways for black two main ways. So white could take here, which isn't that great, which you can see pretty quickly here. Because now, we can play e6, again, this idea of the bishop coming. And we're quickly going to get kind of an equal position where white doesn't have much going for it. So taking isn't that good. So there's two main ways to deal with this. b3, and here you might see bishop g4, bishop e2, e6, getting the king out of here, dealing with this. And again, we're looking at a fairly positional game from here, and black doesn't have any major issues. So the other way for white to play is simply c5. And so we relieve the tension on this side of the board. And from here, there's a couple of different ways for white to approach this position once we get to this structure. So one idea is the queen can come to b3 and then eventually play a4, with the idea that, taking, opening up this a file eventually, and white, is always threatening to come in on the a file, and black has to contend with that. So that's one idea. Another idea, here we go, is once this is closed, is to bring this knight to e4, e5. And the idea here is, if you can bring this knight to e4, so let's go ahead and put a couple moves on the board. Say we get g6 here with the idea of not playing e6 to develop this bishop. Obviously, this bishop's not coming out on this diagonal anyway very far unless you play e6, bishop e7. So let's say g6. Well, knight can come here. And the problem here is for black. If for instance, you now want to go knight b to d7, this pawn is dropping. So this actually, inconveniences black's development a little bit. And often, basically, white's plan is to leave this pressure here and simply reinforce this knight with f4. And eventually, this knight can come to, eventually take here. If you take here, though, white's getting some f-file pressure once white takes back with the f-pawn. So that's how a lot of, once we get the c5 move in, that's kind of the general idea for a lot of how these games tend to go. So now let's come back, let's see what happened in the game. So, again, we get c5, and Anish actually does play g6 with that idea, and we do get knight e5 now from Fabi. So Anish plays bishop g7, and then, like I mentioned, f4 now from Fabi, just reinforcing this knight. Again, if black ever takes, the f-file pressure, again with this side of the board becoming locked down, we could see play develop on the king side, and white would, want to use this open f-file, well, semi-open f-file. So here we see a move that isn't as common as castles is the main move here, but Anish plays a5, and with a5 we see now that the black can totally block up this queen side. So again, we saw that in some lines you see bishop b3, queen b3, and then a4, and then you're opening the a file, and white is getting pressure. So now we see that with a4, any pawn move from white, and black has the option. Black could take if it was to black's advantage, but if white approaches these pawns with his pawn, black can immediately block the position by simply advancing the other pawn. So if we got b4, we could have a4. So black can now totally shut down the queen side. Note that this pawn, however, not being on a6, could maybe be a target at some point. And of course, this pawn is well defended, but this could become a tactical liability at some point in the game. But for now, again, black can shut down anything from white. Any pawn move, and black can shut down the queen side if black wants. So bishop e2, logical developing move for this bishop. And now queen c7. So what's queen c7 about? It's the most common move here, so why is it played? Well, the idea is simply, again, yeah, so what is this queen doing? Well, it's defending c6. Like we said, as long as this knight is sitting here reinforced, for one thing, this knight is helping cover g4, although that's not very well covered, but this knight is always attacking c6. So with queen c7, now this knight is freed up to develop, because otherwise, if you're not, this pawn can just be taken and this knight can't move, then black just can't develop. So very logical move, queen c7, just to defend here. So we get castles, and now h5 from Anish. Again, most common move here, and black is gaining more space. Maybe this bishop eventually wants to come to h6. If white were to ever move this f pawn or trade this pawn, you could see this pawn being a huge weakness and this bishop coming. And again, now black has space on both flanks, and if white, for instance, wanted to use this as a target and maybe play h3 and g4 eventually, we see that black is actually pretty well prepared to, this white king could get in trouble as well because black has access to the king side. So yeah, again, sensible move for black here. So h3 from Fabiano. Again, so now we're controlling this square. If h5 could have supported the bishop developing here, even though white is on this square, but fighting for control of this g4 square. You could see maybe in the right circumstance, maybe you'd want to play g4 and go for an attack eventually, but that could also quickly backfire on white. So so this bishop can't come to g4. This bishop comes to f5, and this bishop looks pretty nice here all of a sudden. So this position at this point, who would you take in this position? I don't think black is considerably worse. In a closed position like this, the engine evaluation, I wouldn't put too much stock in it, but the engine says it's nearly equal. And yeah, I don't see a huge imbalance here that either side is clearly preferable in this position. Bishop d2, and this bishop is off the back rank. It's developed, quote unquote. It's not looking at much. It is eyeing up this a5 pawn, which again is well defended, but just note that this pawn is sitting there not defended by another pawn. Again, this queen now freed this knight up to move. This knight does move. And just slightly improving the piece. With this kind of closed position, we expect to see a lot of kind of slow maneuvering play, and that's what we're getting. And again, for now, not too much is going on in this position. So now h4, and yeah, it's, is this the best move? The engine gives a couple of other moves, but with this closed of a position, black isn't, you're leaving this pawn in h4. Now it's not defended by anything except the rook. But again, it's so closed. There's no easy way for white to exploit that pawn, and it's dissuading g4. Anish doesn't want to get attacked himself. Any attempt, by white to attack black could backfire, so maybe it's not really an issue, but I don't think this is really weakening black either. And again, it's basically telling Fabi that, I don't want to see these pawns coming at me, and I'm going to go ahead and mitigate against that. So yeah, h4. Queen e1. The queen does look at this pawn now, but again, it is defended. And we also see now that we have a battery against this pawn, which again it's not an issue at this moment. But, it's something to notice, and Fabiano certainly was aware that with this move he's pressurizing both of these pawns that are, again, both of these pawns are not defended by pawns, they're defended by rooks. So could they be tactical liabilities? It's definitely on Fabiano's mind at this point. So now knight e4. And just like white had this idea to put this knight on e5, this is a common feature, again, in this opening in general. You also want to bring, the black wants to bring its knight to e4, and I'll sit here. And again, it's a strong piece. The engine actually wants to just take with the bishop, preferring knights in a closed position. And usually, if the bishop was here, again, you'd usually see the pawn going here, defended by the bishop. Bishop's in a different place, but it's the same idea. This pawn is really occupying some nice space, restricting white's center. And, again, this position just looks very equal. There's no clear way for white to advance. There's not really much more for black to do either. And again, if black tried to get anything going, black could quickly be facing a counterattack from white. But this position is, again, the engine says it's equal. It looks equal just positionally. There's no brilliant way for white to maneuver to get some breakthrough, or black for that matter. So sorry, let's go back to the game. In the game, Fabi actually takes with the knight, and the bishop backs up. But it's the same deal here. This position, for now, again, where's the breakthrough here? But there is a threat in this position. There's now a threat in this position with this bishop retreat. And again, we see, well, this pawn is defended. This pawn is defended. So these bishops are pressurizing the black king side. But what is actually being accomplished? These pawns are defended. They can't be won. This knight is sitting here. What can it do but take the knight? So Anish's move here is f6. And Anish, when he plays this move, is undoubtedly thinking that the next move is takes here, because what else can be done? If you take here, queen takes, and bishop a5, okay, but you won 2 pawns, but it's a piece, and white doesn't have an immediate follow-up that's crushing. So, I think Anish with f6, he's probably expecting this move, in which case here, again, look at this position. We're blocked. There's nowhere for white to go. If white plays a4, again, we get b4, and white is never winning this. In fact, the engine says black is slightly better, which, you're restricting white in the center. I don't exactly see how. Again, black has this space, but how's black winning this? Black probably isn't. But anyway, that seems like that's what Anish was expecting. He's just expecting knight takes d7. But it's not what we get. Here is the tactic out of the blue. So what did Fabi play here? Maybe take a few seconds. There's not that many moves in the position. that make sense from a tactical perspective. But go ahead and see. If you haven't seen this game before, maybe take a few seconds. What's the tactical blow here that Fabi finds brilliantly here? Alright, so out of nowhere, with this knight hanging, we get bishop takes a5. Bishop takes a5, and now we've got two pieces hanging for white, and yet white now has a strong advantage out of nowhere. It's a really cool tactic. So what is the problem here? Well, let's take a look at the computer's recommendation. So Anish didn't go with this, but the computer wants to take on a5, and here you might say, oh, well, at least we're winning this pawn, and maybe this pawn falls. But no, trade the queens, and now take rook a8, because you have to move this rook somewhere. And now the bishop takes, and white has won 3 pawns. And all of a sudden white, for the 3 pawns, for one thing, these pieces are aggressively placed, and of course these pawns are ready to roll up the board. So, and yet that was the best try. What Anish played was rook takes. And this is actually worse. This is now really going downhill. So here, again, it's it's knight takes c6. And of course you can't, you can't take the knight and lose the rook, in which case, white's actually winning material in that line. So you have to just back up, which is what Anish does. And again, bishop takes b5, and now it's the same situation essentially, except with the queens on the board, and that's an advantage to white. That's an advantage to white because this queen is also a liability now. This queen can get hit, attacked by the pawns coming down the board, the bishop, the knight, and of course this queen can support. This position is now totally winning for white. Out of nowhere. It's just a brilliant sequence. And from here, Anish there is no way to turn this around. So let's see just what happens from here. Bishop e6, trying to get back to hold the fort, pressure. We're immediately hitting this pawn on a2. So a4, moving the pawn up the board. Pawn to f5. So, getting this bishop freed up, if this pawn moves up the board, there's threats on this diagonal. But again, there's just nothing, there's already just nothing to do here. Queen d2 simply, and threatening now to get this pawn up the board. Bishop f6, defending here, and now just d5, and black is just already getting steamrolled, and there's nothing to do. The engine actually, wants to take on c5, which is essentially just resigning at that point. You can, of course, take here, and white is, again, totally winning. Even better, x-ray this queen, and still the bishop's hanging. You could pin this pawn, but this is really cool stuff all of a sudden. And now win this piece. So that's a cool line. But anyway, Anish just backs up, and now it's getting worse. And here we simply have rook ac1 defending. And again, pawns are just coming down the board. King f8, at least getting the king out of the way, getting the king off the diagonal with his bishop. And these pawns are just coming down the board. Queen c8, again, just backing up, getting out of this d6 move, which we see, and again, nothing to do here. Black takes. You can quickly see that. I mean, either move here if you just advance. Knight e7, hitting the queen. The queen gets out of the way. It's c6, and it's game. It's just game over. So black takes. C takes d6. You know, black. If you're black, you're thinking, well, I broke up these two pawns. But it's still not. It's not good enough. We get queen e8. Again, just desperately trying to hold the fort, having to go into this diagonal, of course. And still knight e7. And, you know, if you take, it's check. You know, if you were to take here, it's check. This, you just have to give this up, and it's still these two pawns. So you can't take this knight. So yeah, Anish plays bishop e6, and now the rook comes in, and you know it's very clearly over. Rook h7. Anish is not giving up. He is fighting here. Knight backs up. You know, we could take here and then take here. The bishop protects itself, but now the rook just backs up. This rook is a liability now. You know, black is quickly just becoming totally frozen here. Rook c8, really the only piece it could really move at all. But with that, you know, that rook out of the way, I'll just run the a pawn down the board. King g7, still trying to evacuate this king. Still a6, pawn just wants to queen. King gets out of the way again, and still a7. Queen f8, and, you know, hitting this pawn. But the knight comes back to e7, and, you know, if you take here, d takes, you know, take either way, and rook d1, and this, I mean, yeah, this is still, it's just totally gone. So we get knight b6 from Anish, just trying to hang on. Queen f2, of course, is a powerful threat now. The rook gets out of the way. There's nothing else to do. You basically have to give this up. A better move would have been queen f6, and you do hold this. But here, bishop d7 is a nice move. You take that, and you get this. So that's over. Yeah, this bishop was holding this. So yeah, just a lot of nice tactics in this position. So Anish is just basically waiting for the final hammer blow here. So Fabiano grabs, queen g5, and moving this bishop is, again, it's not doing anything to stop what's coming. This pawn is just falling, and it does. Queen takes g6, king h8, queen h5 check, king g7, and now the knight grabs here. This rook is pinned. It's a nice move. So king g8, and the last move of the game, to add insult to injury, this knight comes back to e7, check. And here Anish resigned, and it's kind of a shame because there is a gorgeous follow-up. If we see this thing out to the mate here, that's inevitable. You know, black can hold on a little while longer. The engine says it's like +9, so it's not immediately mating, but if we see this out, we get a really cool sequence. So again, Anish resigned here, But let's say king g7. Here, what's the killer move here? Maybe take another few seconds. There's a really cool tactical move here for white. You've got plenty of pieces, plenty of firepower here. What's the move? Okay, well that was a bit of deliberate deception on my end, but it's rook f3 here. It's rook f3, yeah. It's just not a move that catches your eye. But as soon as you take here, you see that this move is, of course, devastating. Best way to hold on is queen h8, but of course that's not stopping. Actually, no. That's what you want. Excuse me. And, at the very least you're winning the queen here. But we can just go ahead and play it out a little longer. Check. And now we're very close to mate here. So, really cool scene. I mean, that's a great way to finish it off. Of course, there are other ways to finish it off this pawn. This knight's, you could have won the rook here. Here, that's still totally winning. This rook is actually falling there, so it wouldn't be ideal, but yeah, it's still totally winning. Anything wins at this point. So, yeah, how about that tactic, huh? Let's take it back. Let's go back to where it all started. So with f6, in this closed position, this is equal. This position is equal. f6 is just a totally losing blunder for black. How many times, we fall asleep sometimes in these closed positions where we think we can afford a little slip up here. And, we forget that we have to be on alert for tactics at all times. And yeah, bishop takes a5, and it's just an avalanche after that. So cool. Really good stuff. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Fabiano Caruana. Again, I'm pulling for him coming up here in April. Would love to see him finally get a world championship. He, of course, put the best effort to actually toppling Magnus in a world championship. Magnus, deserved that. Tie breaks are tie breaks, but, I think Fabiano, if he gets to that match with Ding Liren, I don't see any way Fabiano loses that. He is going to be on the warpath. I really like Ding too, for what it's worth, but, Ding, and I'm glad Ding got a championship. I also, of course, feel terrible for Nepo, and I would not mind seeing him get some redemption, but don't really want to see another rematch after we had, just after the last two performances from him, just not really super hyped for a rematch with Nepo involved. But anyway, we're going to continue our candidates preview. We're going to take a look at some games from the other candidates. We might do another Fabi game or two as well, so keep an eye out. Until then, I've got a lot of new content going up, so please stay tuned. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.